Tuesday, July 25. Breaking down the dividing wall. What action does Paul say Christ took toward the law of commandments expressed in ordinances? Why did he take this action? Let's look at Ephesians 2 verses 14 and 15. For he himself is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. Paul probably alludes here to the balustrade or fence that surrounded the court of Israel in Herod's temple, with its death threat. Paul imagines this wall coming down and Gentiles being granted full access to worship God, as we read in Ephesians 2:18, for through him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. Any such wall, says Paul, is removed by the cross. For there we learn that these two peoples, Jews and Gentiles, are really one. Some believe that Ephesians 2:14 and 15 teaches that the 10 commandments, inclusive of the Sabbath commandment, are abolished or set aside by the cross. However, in Ephesians, Paul demonstrates profound respect for the 10 commandments as a resource for shaping Christian discipleship. He quotes the 5th commandment in Ephesians 6:2 and 3. Honour your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth, and alludes to others, for example, the 7th in chapter 5, verses 3 to 14. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord, and having no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light, and whatever makes manifest is light. Therefore he says, Awake you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. And verses 21 to 33. Submitting to one another in the fear of God. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church. And he is the Saviour of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. The 8th is found in Ephesians 4, verse 28. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labour, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. And the 9th we find in Ephesians 4 and verse 25. Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbour, for we are members of one body. And Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5 is where he talks about the 10th. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. This aligns with Paul's earlier assertions about the law in Romans 3:31. Do we then make void the law through faith? Certainly not. On the contrary, we establish the law. And Romans 7 and verse 12, therefore the law is holy and the commandment holy and just and good. Sorry for my neighbour mowing his lawn in the background. I've had a little break now. Let's continue. He addresses the misuse of the law, but he honours the law itself and assumes its continuity. Hence, to use these verses to abolish the 10 Commandments, especially in light of all the other verses in the Bible about the perpetuity of the law, is clearly a misrepresentation of Paul's intent here. Instead, any use of the law to drive a wedge between Jews and Gentiles, and especially to exclude Gentiles from full partnership among the people of God and access to worship, would be anathema to Paul and a misuse of the divine intention for the law. The law in Ephesians 2:14 and 15 is either the ceremonial aspects of the law that divided Jew from Gentile, represented in Paul's complex phrase, the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, or it is the whole Old Testament system of law as it had come to be interpreted, augmented, and misused as a wedge to distance Jews from Gentiles. And so to finish today, what tensions among Seventh-day Adventists or among members of the wider Christian community need to be confronted and overcome? Why should our common love of Christ be enough to overcome these tensions? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.